So here we are. I'm a little surprised, sad, but also relieved. Today is the second to last week. Next week is it for this series. I don't know. I don't know yet what's happening next. If you have requests, if you have an idea, if you have something that you think will help others that is good for this platform, comment and I'll give it some consideration. So today we are talking about Queen Vashti and Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. What I love about the combination of these three women, combining their stories or pairing their stories together on a given week, as Wilcox does here. What I love about that is these are women whose stories are not told. They're women who are just kind of barely included, right? So the book of Esther, very unique book. It's unique in a lot of ways. It's unique that it's named after a woman. It's unique that God is not directly mentioned at all. It's unique that it is a story of based in non-Jewish. I don't know what words I want. It's about Esther fighting for her people. So advocating for the Jewish people among the non-Jewish, right? But also women speaking to men in power. So Vashti is the queen, and her husband summons her. He's hosting a dinner. She's hosting her own dinner because you just didn't eat together then. And she very bravely says no. So the king has sent his eunuchs, look that term up if you don't know what that is, to summon her, to demand her presence, and she doesn't want to. Now, I'm guessing she knows, well, here we go. It's one of his banquets, and so he's probably drunk, which the text tells us he is. And she doesn't want to be a part of it, doesn't want to be shown off like a prized possession instead of a human being. What's fascinating is her courage leads to such fear and a little, so first actually it leads to disbelief by the king, but then fear from his advisors, who, so he has said to them, what legally can I do about this? So he's very offended that she wouldn't come. And what they come up with is you should make this decree, basically mandating that women be at their husbands' beck and call, quite literally. That's what they come up with. Why do they come up with that? Because, again, coming straight from the text, if Vashti's refusal gets out to the other women, then they, domino effect, will begin daring to stand up to their husbands and acting of their own accord. And that is scary to these men. And why is that scary? Because what does that mean? If they start speaking up for themselves and start acting of their own accord, then they have to be people and not possessions. They have to be humans with their own mind and not dependent upon them for all of the things, right? So what does this mean for us when we look at our purpose, looking at women in the Bible to kind of get a better idea of how God sees women versus what religion has done and continues to do at frightening speeds, especially today in America, the land of the free. So in our context then, right, if that's our purpose, this is a book that, the book of Esther as a whole is a book that is kind of off-brand. That's a weird phrase to use, I realize, but it is. It's a little off-brand for what is typically what we would recognize as a book of the Bible, and yet it's there. Now, there are other writings that are not included. What we have today as our Bible, this one's in rough shape. This is the seminary Bible, and it's been through some stuff. But what we have today is the result of conversation and debate, and this one's in, this one's out. So Esther's in, and it's not the norm, which says to me, and again, I don't know this for certain, it just makes sense to me, that here the Spirit is at work in the inclusion of the story, but also within the lives of the people in the story itself. Though never directly mentioned, God is very clearly working through Esther, but also empowering and working through Vashti to give her a sense of empowerment, a sense of courage and freedom to speak up for herself. And it is that act which leads to the consequence of she may never come before the king again. She's essentially removed or dethroned, or whatever phrase you want. And it is that removal of her that leads to Esther eventually being the new queen. And because of her position, she eventually leads to the saving of her people. So the Spirit is all at work. So though religion would erase these women, and I say that because Esther is not often preached in Christian churches. Queen Vashti certainly doesn't typically have anything good said about her, if she's mentioned at all. But their stories are here, and they are here for a reason. They are here because God has a message for us today. We have a purpose. We have a calling, even when there are those who fight to legalize the silencing of us. You know, there's a phrase in the book of Esther that is on repeat for such a time as this, and that just seems pretty appropriate for today, does it not? For such a time as this. Yeah, gotta love how the Spirit works. Because had I not started this challenge when I did, we wouldn't be here in this story at this time when this chaos is happening in our country. So, Vashti speaks up for herself, and it is her actions of independence and empowerment that put into motion that which allows Esther to rise to her position, that eventually saves the people. The New Testament passage for today is that of Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Now, this could be Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, aka Joseph. It could be Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus. We don't really know. The point is, this is Matthew's account of the resurrection, and it is these two women who go to the tomb to see his body. They go, that's step one, right? They are faithful. They are greeted by an angel. They are shown the empty tomb. They are sent on their way to preach the good news to the disciples. They are stopped on their way by the resurrected Jesus and again encouraged to go and tell the disciples that he is risen and that he will see them in Galilee. Of all of the people, it is these women that see it, experience it, and tell it first. If you read the Gospels, pick any of them really from the beginning to the end, you'd think it would be one of the disciples. Simon Peter in particular, probably. But that's not what happens. And there's a lot to that. And I do not think that it is a stretch to say that the fact that the disciples have fled Jesus, I am not making that up. That's not hyperbole. That is what Scripture says. And these women, the number of women depends on which gospel you're reading, are attentive and present. And they are the ones first sent to preach the good news. Now, again, each of the four Gospels has a slightly different version of this piece of the story, but that's true for the whole of the Gospel. So if we take the Gospels as truth, what we have to recognize, and how it is often explained, is that, well, if four people see an accident, you're going to get four different accounts of an accident. If four people witness an amazing event, you're still going to get four different versions of the event, right? Because of the lens, the human lens, and so many factors. That's what the Gospels are. So the stories that each Gospel writer tells, and the way in which they tell them, and the perspective from which they tell them, gives us insight into who they, the writer, are, that is. Little verb agreement there. Underneath all of that, we get an understanding of who God is and how God sees women. But we do have to recognize that it all is going through the lens of the particular writer. So Mark has these women turning away in fear and never really saying a word. The other three, Matthew, Luke, and John, all have the women preaching to one or multiple of the male disciples. Just depends, right? So that tells us more about the writers than it does about God. What we know about how God feels about women and their call to ministry and to spreading the gospel is the thread that runs through all four, and that is that they are there, they are active, and at least from the three we see that God is calling these women to spread the truth. Because as they are spreading the truth, already the counter story is making its way through what? Through the high priests, through the religious leaders, concocting this story to put out there. The altar story, the counter story. That his disciples have not disappeared but have gone and stolen Jesus' body. What they did with it, what the theory is of what they did with it, I don't know. But so these women are the original preachers of the gospel. I don't know what more we need. I don't know why we have to be having this debate in 2025. If women are called, if women are meant to be under the thumb of men, Queen Vashti from all the way back there. Partnership is not subservience. Partnership is not domination. Partnership is equity. It is mutual uplifting. The gospel, the message of Jesus, the message of the empty tomb and the ascension, these are things meant for all believers, all gender identities, to speak and preach to whomever will listen. Why? Because she is called. Whoever she is called. I hope that you are speaking. Like, comment, share, subscribe if you've not already done so. And I will see you next week for our final week. Be well.